Okay, so, oh no, something happened with the Chromecast. Okay, there we go. So we're talking about Dunder methods, also known as magic methods. So who here has ever used any magic methods in Python? Okay, who here has ever used underscore init in Python? Okay, that's a magic method, right? So you've all used magic methods. Okay, so I did two really dumb things for this presentation today. One, I didn't make any slides. I'm just going to live code. Two, I decided to augment my talk with the PyPy module. So yeah, we're going to see how that goes. One that I wrote like just yesterday. So anyways, so let's get started. So let's assume that we have this simple object called a contact. And a contact has a name, a phone number, and an age, pretty simple. And then we have a Rolodex, and a Rolodex contains contacts. That's pretty much it. It's really boring. You can only add contacts to your Rolodex. You can't really do anything else with them. So that's pretty much what we have. So let's go ahead and run this real quick. So if we run this, what's happening is we're creating a Rolodex, we're creating a contact, and then we add Bob to our Rolodex, and then we're printing our Rolodex. Well, you're going to see this nice ugly thing in the console when we print that tells us absolutely nothing useful, right? So the way you can fix this is by adding a magic method. So who thinks they know which magic method we need to add to fix this? Okay. All right. You're not quite sure which one. That's okay. That's okay. All right. So let's just start with string, right? So let's add this Dunder string to our Rolodex here. So just like this. And all it really needs to do is return some type of string, right? So we can, return really just self contacts, right? Because that's a list, and it should be able to be printable. So let's try that, and let's rerun it. And now, well, this isn't much better. Now we get a list, but in the list is a contact object, and that doesn't really tell us much either. So now we go to our contact, and we define the same thing, right? And we're just going to do return, I don't know, let's go with self name, and then self phone number. And we don't really need to know the age, right? That's like not important. So let's just print that. That didn't change anything, right? Well, surprise. This list object, its toString method actually calls repr on everything inside of it. So even though we defined a string on this object, it doesn't matter. We also have to define repr, right? So we could do this really lame cheating thing, right, where we just say repr equals string, and that'll work, I think. There we go. See? So that works fine. However, there's some people who have some strong opinions about what repr is supposed to look like. And those people say that repr is supposed to basically represent the object in a way where you can easily recreate it. So this would basically look exactly like you would type it in Python. So you would basically pass in all the variables. And then we're going to do the same thing list does, and we're going to call repr on all of these in case they're not strings already. Actually, that has to go in the brackets. So who here is seeing these f strings for the very first time in Python? They're pretty cool, right? Pretty cool. This is 3.6. You can't get this anywhere else. See, live programming, probably not a great choice. Anyways, we'll just call it there for consistency's sakes, and then we rerun this. and we see that we have our contact, Bob, in this list, right? And so let's just finish this. And then repr of self.age. Right? Good. So that looks pretty good. Right? So the cool thing about repr and string is that if you don't have string, Python will always fall back to repr. So pretty much if you're ever writing a object in Python, the first thing you probably want to do is write this repr function right here. However, repr will not fall back to string. So it's pretty important to have at least this one. Okay. Sorry, just looking at my notes real quick. Okay, so another cool thing about repr is it's what you see in the debugger. So let's go ahead and add a debug statement here, and then debug this. Now we're stopped there at the breakpoint, right? So let's drop into the terminal, and then let's print Rolodex. Well, now we get this ugly thing, even though we have string, because in the debugger, you get the repr. So here you would want to basically define a repr so that you knew what your object was when you're in the debugger. And we're going to cheat. So that's one use of repr. Okay, so now let's say we have this contact that's in our Rolodex, right? And we want to know if, basically without going through all of our contacts, we want to know if a contact is already in our Rolodex, right? So the syntax for that in Python is going to be the in statement, right? So we're going to say Bob in Rolodex, right? And that'll just tell us if it's in there or not. And I'm getting this type error because Rolodex is not an iterable. Basically, it's not a list. And so Python's like, I don't know what to do about that. Well, there's this nice little magic method called contains. And this is how you tell Python whether or not something is in you, whether you contain it, right? Well, since we already have a list, we can just pass down the buck and return self item in self.contacts, and then let the list kind of do it for us, right? So if we run that, we now get that Bob is in our contact list. Well, that's great, but what Python's doing to figure out if it's in it is actually looking at the address of Bob. So what if we had a Bob2 that was exactly like Bob, right? Then would Bob2 be in the list? Probably not, right? So if we print that, we see that Bob2 is in fact not in the list. So what Python's doing here is it's looking and asking if these, basically every time it goes through an item in the list, it asks if this is the item. Well, if we add this dunder equals method to our contact, then we can tell it whether these objects are equal. Okay? So basically we would just want to compare every single value. So this isn't auto-completing, which sometimes bugs me. So I'm going to add this little cool type hint, and then it'll auto-complete for me. And then self.phone number equals other phone number, and forgot an and age, right? So I don't think I have any bugs. If you find any bugs, point them out. Cool. So now if we run this, it's now in there because it saw that Bob2 and Bob were pretty much the same thing. Right? So that's like so much better than like trying to add some method like here that says like define is it in, right? Like, and then trying to call the function or whatever. You can just use these magic methods to instead use Python syntax to ask exactly what you want to know. So now let's say we want to do something incredibly stupid and add two contacts together. Not really sure what that would be, right? But let's just say that we have this other guy named Joe, and we want there to be a new guy called Bob Joe, and he's Bob and Joe, right? Well, I think you guys know what's going to happen. We're going to get an error because unsupported operand, yada yada. So we can fix that. We can add a define add here. And that tells Python what to do when you add things together. So let's just say we're going to return a new contact, and it's going to be like a concatenation of the two names, I guess. So and then the phone number, let's just say it's going to be like the first 7 characters of the one number plus the last of the other one, right? I don't know. We're just doing crazy things here. Okay. Oh, and then it needs an age, right? So we'll just add the 2 ages. Okay. So now what happens if we add them? Well, I didn't print anything, but we didn't get an error, right? So here you go. Cool. So now if we add them, yeah. See, live coding, not a great idea. Anyways, so now we have Bob Joe, right? And he has a number. It's weird, but hey, that's Bob Joe. Okay, so that's cool and all, but what if we want to do something like, we want to know what happens if you have, like let's just say you have Bob and you add just a phone number, right? Like completely 2 different objects completely. You're adding this contact object and a string, essentially, right? What is that? You're going to get all sorts of errors here, but basically you have to just make your add method handle it. So we could say like if is instance other string. So if it's a string, we'll just assume it's a phone number. And then basically return, you know, let's do this. Let's just use copy because that makes our life so much easier. So from copy, import copy. And let's just equals a copy of self, and then new dot phone number is equal to other, return new. Right, so that's going to be our new contact. So now we can add a phone number to a contact by using the plus. And that's cool, but then there's this problem of if you do it the other way around, right? And if we do this the other way around, we're going to get this basically type error because strings can only be added to strings. So one option is you could monkey patch the string object to kind of take in your contact object, and that's going to get really hairy and nasty, and don't ever do that. Another is there's actually what's called a reverse of all of these magic methods, so every magic method that takes 2 on the side of the operand has a reverse version of it. So it's called rand. And Python will actually, because this error happens, Python will then go to the other object and try the rand underscore method. And to be honest, rand is the same as add, so we can actually just do radd equals add, just like that, and it'll work. So now it works both ways, right? There is no r equals, by the way. Equals just works both ways, always, in case you're wondering. Okay. Another thing you can do is you can add in place. So you could say Bob plus equals Joe, right? That's actually a separate magic method as well. That's going to be iadd. So all of these mathematical operators have an I, which means in place, and an R, which means reverse of them, right? So this lets you modify in place. So the implementation is going to be a little bit different because you're actually going to, rather than return an object, you're just going to modify yourself. So you would want to make sure you say like self name equals other name, for example. Ideally, you would want it to work exactly the same as add, but I'm just going to stop there, right? Because I think you guys get the idea. Okay. Well, what's really nice is, I forgot to mention this, but in Python 3, the default implementation of not equal is not equal. Like if you've defined equal, it'll just not it. But in Python 2, that's actually not the case. So if you're in Python 2, make sure you implement not equal, or you're going to run into some really nasty issues where it's equal and not equal at the same time. Yeah, so that's fun. I see someone shaking his head like this has bitten him before in the past. Yep.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So yeah, typically, not equal is really easy, is just return not self, like return not of, this takes in other. You're right. I don't know why I just did that. Man. Of self equals other, right? Just throw not in front of it. Usually works. Cool. So that's like the mathematical magic methods. There's pretty much one for everything, right? For every operator you can think about, there's a magic method for it. So before I move on, any questions so far? Yeah?
On the radd example, does it check for the add first on the left operand?
Correct.
Then it uses the radd?
Correct. So if add returns a type error, then it'll check radd on the next one. Yeah. Cool. All right. So now let's say we wanted to access contacts from our Rolodex as if Rolodex was like a dictionary, right? So basically what we want here is we want square brackets. So we would ask our Rolodex, let's just say the key is the phone number. So we would say, give me the contact with this phone number, right? With square brackets. If I run that, you're going to get an error. It's going to say not subscriptable. What that means is you can't use the square brackets, but I really want to use square brackets, right? So I would just define a get item method. And this is basically telling Python what to do if it encounters square brackets. So, we don't have a dictionary. We have a list. So, we could just do this really ugly thing where we write a for loop, for C in self contacts. right? And then what does the dictionary return if it's not found? Key error, yeah. So you would raise a key error if you can't find it. So we run that, and now we found Bob just by phone number, right? So for those who have done a lot of Python, you recognize that bracket syntax is used for more than just like dictionary lookups, right? It's also used for like indexes on lists, right? So you might want to like do a check like is instance item int, and then in that case you just there we go. In that case you just return self contacts of that index. This has a really cool extra property, whereas if you implement getItem to handle integers, Python will automatically make it an iterable for you without any other work. So I can now say for C in Rolodex print C, and that will actually work because I have getItem. So because getItem supports integers, I can naturally make Rolodex an iterable. Otherwise, if you want to make an iterable, you'd have to like define this iter method, and it returns your iterable, your iterator, whatever that is, right? And your iterator has to have a method called next, which basically tells Python what the next object is. What? Yeah, so for this example, I could simply return iter of my contacts list, right? And that'll return the iterator. If I wanted to write my own iterator, I'd have to write my own, and it would have to have the next magic method, and that's what defines it as an iterator, right? If you do implement iter, you should also implement reverse, which is basically the reverse iterator, right? So you would return reversed self.contacts. That might not actually work because contacts isn't an iterator. Anyways, but this method right here, if anyone's going to use it, it looks for this magic method, and that just is the iterator backwards, right? So you can go backwards through the same list. A little note on magic methods is so far when I pass the buck down, like when I do this, you'll notice that I'm actually using the higher class method iter on this. Another way to do this is you could just call the magic method directly. So I could say self contacts iter like this, and that would work. However, don't do it. And the reason why is because these global functions actually do more than just the magic method. So for example, we talked about how string will fall back to repr if string is not there. But if you call Dunders string on an object, it won't fall back because it's just looking directly for that method. So try to always pass the buck with the higher class function rather than using the magic method there. Okay, so another thing that bracket syntax supports is slicing, right? So, you could say Rolodex 1, 2, 4, right? You want to start at the first item to the second item, every 4 items. The specific one doesn't make sense, but like you want the first item, stop at the 10th item, and only go every 2 items, right? So like that's how you would slice a list in Python. So let's just change our implementation real quick of getItem, and we're just going to print whatever we get, just so you can kind of like see what's going on. And you're going to see that Python's actually passing in the slice object, right? So like if you wanted to handle slicing, you could do that as well, but it's still within the same getItem method. Well, surprise, you can actually pass in anything you want into square brackets, right? Like anything. There's this cool little thing called an ellipses, You could like do some crazy things. It's 3 dots. Oh, yeah. It doesn't work with the slicing though. But like, if you wanted to do that, I have no idea what this would mean. But hey, you could. And then, hey, you get all those objects as a tuple, right? So you could do like something really stupid here if you really wanted to and pass in like another function that calls like another function and whatever. And these could just do whatever you want with square brackets, right? So Python is like a language where you can do anything, but you probably shouldn't, right? It's one thing you probably shouldn't do, because as soon as someone sees like Rolodex, myfunc, ellipses, hello, they're going to be like, what the heck is that doing, right? Like, you would have no idea. But yeah, so if you wanted to support any of those things like slicing, etc., you would have to do that all in getItem. So getItem is pretty much just bracket syntax. And then its companion is setItem. Whoops, not setAttr. setItem. And it's the exact opposite. It's if you wanted to set an item, so you would say Rolodex of some key equals Joe, right? So you're like basically setting the key. Makes sense for a dictionary. In our Rolodex, probably doesn't make sense right now as we have it. But that's the method you would use if you wanted to do setItem, like this. And just like getItem, you can pass in anything in the square brackets that you want to, if you really wanted. Like a slice notation. Don't know why, but you could. So that is basically how you can make your class act like a dictionary. Yep. The next one that I really like is getAttr. And just so you understand, is if you have autocompletion, you're also going to see this getAttribute. Basically what getAttr does is dot notation. So if I went to Rolodex and I wanted to call, I don't know, something that doesn't actually exist, like print all or whatever, I haven't defined that at all on Rolodex. So what Python is going to do, well, if we run this right now, I'm going to get this. I don't know where that's coming from. Bob is none apparently now. I don't know. Oh, it's because I got rid of the. Oh, because getItem is now bad, probably. Nope. Great. Live coding really hurts you. All right, so I'll just try to move on. It's calling this right here. Well, it's because I have this probably. Let's get rid of these for now. So I got an error. You'll see Rolodex does not support item assignment. That's because anyways, we don't want that. Okay, there we go. That's what I was hoping for. Doesn't have an attribute, right? There's no such thing as print all on Rolodex. Well, if we implement getAttr, it actually is called every time an item doesn't exist on the object. So anytime you use dot notation, and Python can't find it, it's going to call getAttr to see if you want to do anything else. This can be really useful in cases where perhaps you have like dynamic mappings that you don't want to like write a function for. One really common case is like you're wrapping a JSON API and you don't want to call it like a dictionary. You don't want to call like result my object and like chain this. So you can instead like implement getAttr and then you could just say result my object, right? And just use dot notation like that. So that's one common one. Another is if you're wrapping some other class. So maybe you have a child class that you're wrapping, like a like in this case, contacts, and maybe you want to pass it down to that one. So like, oh, well, I don't have that attribute, so maybe I'll return the attribute on this one that I'm wrapping, right? And then you could get an attribute on the thing that you're wrapping. Now, get attribute is very similar. However, the difference is getAttr is only called if it doesn't exist. GetAttribute is always called. So if you implement getAttribute, it will always be called on dot notation, even if the attribute already exists on your class. So getAttribute isn't as common to implement because you typically don't need to intercept every single dot notation. But if you wanted to, that's how you would do it. There's also setAttr. And this is where it gets a little confusing because there is a setAttr, but there is no set attribute. And setAttr is always called when you want to set an attribute, not like getAttr. So setAttr is actually more like getAttribute, and getAttr is kind of its own thing. So just to add some confusion to all of that. Okay, so any questions so far? Yeah.
I had a question farther back on the get item.
Mm-hmm.
You said if the item supports integer indexing, it makes it iterable. How does that work? Does it like try to get the 0th element, and if it doesn't get here, then it assumes it?
Exactly. Yeah. So it calls the iter method, and if it's not there, then it just tries indexing. So get item at 0. And if it works, then it just keeps going until it gets an index error. Yeah? Any other questions so far? Cool. All right. Okay, so now we're getting kind of into like the more dangerous magic methods, right? So let's say you wanted your class to act like a function, right? You could implement call. And what that pretty much means is that you can now use your object like a function. So you can put brackets on it and it'll run. Notice it printed contacts. Yeah, I have a bug somewhere, probably because of that. Yes. Okay, so it prints hello because it's now acting as a function. So this allows you to do crazy things, like you could say class echo, right? And you're going to define call on echo to print, print whatever it's passed in. So it would print args, right? And then basically this is just another version of print. I can then do echo hello world, and that works. So even though it's a class, it acts like a function. Then we're going to do something you probably shouldn't do, and you can like implement a reversed OR, right? So the OR operator is the pipe, right? So, we could, this is the reversed OR, so now we could, we don't like Python, we like Bash, so, we could do something like this, and we could pipe it into echo. Yeah? Right? And that works. I think? No?
That's echoes being called as an entity called.
Yeah. Object takes no parameters. Yes. This one. I'll just stop doing that. Yeah. So, yeah, you could pipe anything in here, like, foobar, just to prove the, So now we have, like, bash syntax, right? You could do the same thing. You could say, like, my file, right? is some type of file object. And then you could say like, oh, I want to put foobar into my file, right? Kind of like you would do on bash. You could also say like, I want to append to my file, right? There's like things you probably shouldn't do, but you can. So all you have to do is create this file object and then implement the correct magic methods, right? So we have the reverse less than, which is actually just, no, reverse greater than, less than, greater, okay, which is just greater than. So there is no reverse less than, just greater than. And instead we would say text equals something, right? And then the double is going to be a right shift, right? So we're going to do a reverse right shift. Right? And then we're going to print my file text. We're going to see that, hey, we have a bug, of course. See, I'm getting this type error, so this needs to be less than because it's the reverse of greater than. Okay, got it. Here we go. So now we have bash-like syntax on our objects, right? So those are some nasty things you can do. Some other common magic methods are delete. So delete is called when your object gets garbage collected. So when Python's ready to garbage collect, it's going to call delete. This is useful. Let's say you have like an open connection, right? This is useful so like instead of having your user close your connection, you can just close it for them. So you could just do like this while. Oh my God, what did I do? Okay, and then you could just like say if self connection closed, return, right? Just like basically write your del so that it kind of cleans up after itself if it has to. And then along the lines of our string and repr is also format. And so this is basically like string, but called when you use a format block. So when you have an f string like this, and you pass in the object, it calls format instead. So if you wanted it to do something different format, you'll see it passes in this format spec as well. Which basically, when you have your format string, you can do the specs. So like, for example, a float, you would do like :.2f, and that would say always 2 digits, right? So this right here is the format spec, and it will pass that into your format method in case you wanted to format yourself differently based on whatever criteria you had. Okay? Okay, so now let's assume that we want to add a validator for our phone numbers in our contact. So most people, I think, know here that how we could do that is we could define a property, right? And we could say phone number. And then this method will actually like do whatever we want when this syntax is used. And that is an option, but we're talking about magic methods today. So I'm going to do it another way. And you can actually say phone number equals some class. And we have to define that class, obviously. And then this phone number can actually contain its own validation logic. This is useful if you like want to break that validation logic outside of your contact class. and then all you have to do is define set get no and delete. And then this will actually act as a property on your object, and it's completely invisible to you. So let's just for now say that we're just going to do this really simple. I don't want to create any more bugs, so we're just going to create a new class. And its number equals a phone number. Okay, so now if we go down here, you'll see that even though I haven't set it, yeah, that's what I get. So even though I haven't set it, it's still working, but my code, okay. There we go. So now if I do, so I'm accessing my test class, and I'm just setting the number on it. Well, I'm just getting the number from it, and it returns A, even though A is all the way up here in my phone number object. So Python's going to test, and it's getting number, and it sees that number is an object that has a get, and so it's going to call the get instead of returning the object itself. So that's pretty much how you implement your own properties, which is a great way to segregate the validation logic if your main object is just already too complicated and you don't want that validation logic in there. Okay, so any questions? Cool. Okay, so here's a terminal. I wrote this cool little module called Dunderdoc. You can pip install it, right? Just pip install Dunderdoc. And this is a work in progress. But basically, it prints every magic method that I know of. So Python im Dunderdoc print all. And that just gives you some really ad hoc documentation for all the magic methods. Because I found trying to find this was all over the place. I had to know which magic method I was actually looking for, and then search the Python docs for it, etc. So this is cool where you can just now that I'm in less, I can just be oh, which one uses brackets, right? So I search for bracket, and it says, oh, hey, there's that one. And there's the get item, so this is square bracket notation. And here's an example of how you might implement that, etc. As you scroll through here, you're going to see ones that there's no documentation for it all because I didn't finish it. It's work in progress, but hey, there's a lot of magic methods. So if you're interested in any magic methods, you can just pip install that, look at all of them, kind of see what they do. You'll see I have all the mathematical ones at the top, so division, etc. Just keeps going. There's lots of them. So that's pretty much it. Were there any specific magic methods that anyone wanted to know about, learn about? Or any other questions? Yeah, great one. So if you want to write a with statement, so there's enter, right? See, I didn't get around to this one. Yeah, oh well. But this is for context managers, which is basically the with statement. So if I do something like with my object, right? It's going to call the enter method on that object, which basically defines how you want the context to work. And then as soon as the with block ends, it's going to call exit. So an example is basically, you might, like, if this was a database connection or something, you might want to, like, start transaction here or something. And then on the exit block, exit actually returns an exception. So you would look and see if there was an exception. So like if exec type, it's been a while since I've written one of these, so I'm not sure this is exactly correct. But it returns an exception, and so you can say like if there's an exception, then like roll back, otherwise commit or something like that, right? Just like a basic example of context manager. That being said, I haven't written context managers in a while because I found that the context lib, there's this there's this context manager decorator, and it's just a class. So you would just say like define transaction, and you just decorate this, and then it yields, which is like where the code executes. So you would do like do stuff, and then you would yield, and then you would like close, right? And you just put a try except around this. In my mind, it's like more readable and easier, so that's kind of what I do, but both work. Yeah, good question.
On more verbose example where you have letter enter,
Mm-hmm.
return value enter, is that the value that gets assigned to the website?
Yeah, when you do as, so as something here, this is whatever the enter returned. Yeah. Anything else? Cool. That's all I have. You can talk to me for more questions or mingle or whatever, and that's pretty much it. Thanks, guys.